Shut up and sit down.
Howdy guys, this is Andy from Big Mac's Workshop and Painting Studio, and today I'm painting an Infinity bike. This is one of the Zamira twins. I'm not sure which one it is. It's the one with the sword, and I'm doing things a little bit different on this, although I am starting off with the airbrush. I started off with heavy dark green, which is the equivalent of Caliban green, or the old Dark Angels greens, as it's a really dark rich green colour. The next layer is Sit Green, and I'm just blending those highlights in really gently from about a 45-degree angle. It's almost to the point where you can barely see the highlights going down. Now this is, I do try some interesting different techniques on this, including my first ever attempt at non-metallic metals, which you'll have to decide whether it looks right or not. Okay, the next layer is Scorpion Green, and again I'm coming down from a similar sort of high 45 degrees, building up those highlights ever so gently. Now Scorpion Green is really vibrant, so it actually starts to bring those highlights out really well, and you get a very bright effect out of the bike. So you just aim nice and steady, nice and low pressure. Obviously this will be done by glazing by hand. As always, we can do anything by hand. What you can do with an airbrush, it's just a bit easier. The next layer is a touch of Scorpion Green and 4 drops of pale yellow, and I'm really starting to bring out those highlights now, getting those extra vibrant colours, as you can see right at the back, and really pulling those highlights together with a really accentuated point towards the rear of the vehicle and towards the most obvious sections where the light would actually hit it. And just ever so gently, just bringing those hot spots in, making the transitions as smooth as I possibly can, including into the sections of near the seat, obviously at the front of the fairing of the bike, and just generally pulling those colours together, giving the bike that extra dimensional sci-fi sort of style. Next, I protect the paint with a gloss varnish to seal it all together. Obviously with an airbrush the paint's really thin, and then once that's dried, I go over the top with a matte varnish to give me that nice flat look what I like to work from. So now the paint's protected, I decided to do a bit of freehand fire onto the fairing of the bike. I wanted it to look like a sort of a hog sort of style with a custom paint job. This was done for a Christmas present for father-in-law, who is a biker rather than a gamer. So I wanted to do as best I could the best work I could, making the bike look interesting. And that was started off with several ultra thin layers of hot orange. So next I'm just picking out the brightest sections of the fairing with Scorpion Green as a glaze. As you can see, I'm just picking out those details across the back of the fairing of the chain guard, and ever so gently glazing the model to make those highlights look extra vibrant. I then do the Scorpion Green with pale yellow again, and I'm pulling those highlights together on the brighter sections. Again, these are really thin layers, which I'm glazing on ever so slowly, just to make those highlights really pop. Once I've got happy with the current colour, I then add some more pale yellow just for the final touches, and really start to pull those highlights around. So I'm moving the paint from the furthest point of the model of the section towards the highlight point, so the paint sort of pulls where I want the highlights to be at its strongest. Now, it's very time consuming doing this, but it is well worth it. the overall effect you get is really cool. So I'm starting to pick out the flames now, which is using Scarlet Red, which is a very vibrant red, but as before I'm using such thin layers, I'm having to take a lot of time just to build those flame strikes up. Again, just glazing it on. Take plenty of time. You've got to, although it's such a small scale model, you've still got to put the effort in to get the flames done in some kind of organic manner. The next layer is going towards this darker sections, which is going to be Gory Red by Vallejo, which does come out as a gloss finish, so just be aware of that. If you ever do use a Gory Red, you will need to matte varnish it afterwards, as it has caught me out several times, making my paint look a lot more glossy than I intended. And then it is a mix of Gory Red and Corn Red for the deepest, darkest sections of the fire, just to add that extra shade in towards the lower sections on the fairings. I'm just picking out the hotter sections with just a very, very thin touch of yellow into the Scarlet Red, just to brighten it up a bit and just to pick out the detail, just to make it a bit smoother across. Now this is a first ever attempt at non-metallic, so I've based the entirety of the engine section in cold grey, just to give me a nice start point. And I'm using 3 different colours for this, which is Decay Black, Huldra Blue and Purity White. And these are really, really thin sections. As you can see, I'm just throwing some black into it just to finish it, get a bit of depth to it. And I'm adding a touch of Huldra Blue to the, and Decay Black to the Purity White to get a sort of a mid-grey tone. And I'm just very gently glazing this paint into all over the engine sections. I then add, whilst the paint's still wet, I'm using a lot of flow aid in this just to keep the paint wet. I then add some more Purity White to get a sort of somewhere like a top tone into the sections. I'm going to blend all the paints together, allowing the blue and the blacks to show through, making that sort of transition. So now I'm throwing some more white highlights right into the centre now. This is on. I've given the engines a few minutes to dry, so I'm just building this sections up because it's very difficult to get the paint to mix properly without pulling other sections of paint off. So you need to be aware that you do occasionally need it to dry and then build it up again. So as you can see, I'm starting to add some Huldra Blue as a very, very thin wash to just add a touch of blue tint to this sort of steel effect. So whilst that's going down, I'm letting it dry a touch, just so I can work with the base colours again. And it's literally a very slow process of adding depth to the edges, bringing up the lightest sections, and then blending it together, wet blending it together. As I said, this is a first attempt at non-metallics. I've never really done anything. Never done anything like this. I did spend some time watching various different tutorials on how to do non-metallic metals, and I believe it's going to take a lot of practice for me to get how I want it to look. And now I'm using a mid-tone to blend into the white and the darker sections, adding more and more of each of the different colours to blend it evenly. I'm obviously making sure that the paint's really thin and doesn't dry too fast. So once again, sort of a mid-tone again, throwing some lighter tones to the extreme front sections, building that colour up ever so nicely, really, really slowly. So you want to get those nice transitions, what you'd hope to see on. So as you saw there, I had a bit of a practice try on the other side of the engine, see if I could get it something right before I even attempted to film it. And I'm just adding more and more depth into the deeper sections, throwing a touch of blue in occasionally just to get that sort of steel reflection all over around the model as well, so it's like reflecting from the sky. As you can see, I've got a pot there that is just purely flow aid in there. I'm using that to keep my brush really damp, allowing me to move the paint around a bit easier so I don't get scruffy blends, allowing more control over the paint. And it really is a case of just keeping on going back and forward to the sections what you've adding the paint to, making more contrast for deeper sections and more bright to the upper sections. And it is very time consuming doing this effect, but when you do get something like what you're after, it is quite nice to get such a nice interesting different colour effect on there. So as you can see, I'm just adding some more depth to the under sections now to get the contrast. I've thrown a couple of gentle chips into the model, and that is my first attempt at non-metallic metal done in a steel colour, and I was quite pleased with it. It did come out a little bit blue, a little bit white from what I wanted, but it did. The effect is overall rather nice. So the next sections is hammered copper. I'm going back onto the normal metal work. I decided against doing hammered the non-metallics for any more metal sections, as these are really small sections, and it would have quite possibly melted my brain doing any more non-metallics on this particular vehicle. So I'm using the hammered copper on all the rest of the metal work. It just adds that little extra colour detail to the model as well. As you can see, the saddle is getting painted in decay black, just to make it all nice and neat, and getting all the leather and the rubbers the same sort of colour. So once the hammered copper is dried, it is Sycorax bronze going over the top, using a much lighter shade than what I would normally use over the metal work, as I wanted the metal to be a lot lighter, but still towards the sort of red brass type colours, keeping it in fitting with the rest of the bike, as obviously red is a fairly complementary to green. So adding that redness to the metalwork really helped. Obviously, Agrax shade on the entirety of all the brass coloured metalwork to get that extra depth into the model, really making that metalwork stand out. Next is Vallejo's bright brass. Now you could use Retributor armour for this, but that's a lot more yellow. Bright brass is quite a silvery brass colour. Just adding that as a highlight to the most upper sections of the metalwork, starting to bring that model together ever so gently. And then I do a mix of bright brass and chrome to the final highlight sections, making those hot spots extra vibrant, really making things stand out. There we are, just a final edge highlight right on the upper sections of the model, with a tiniest touch of chrome now, just to bring that highlight to a real nice finish. As you can see, I'm using a Winsor & Newton at this point, as I wanted to have complete control, or as much control as I could get over the brush. And onto the saddle, it is black grey as the first highlight. I wanted the highlights on the black sections to be quite vibrant, so I do go up quite up through the layers quite quickly on this. The next one is German grey. I'm going over the handles, on the tyres, and again onto the edges of the saddle as well. As you can see, I'm starting to do some proper edge highlighting here with that black grey, and it is quite vibrant, but that's the sort of effect I was aiming for on the saddles. And the final highlight on the saddles is coal grey, just working those extreme points. Again, I'm using a Winsor & Newton, I believe that's a 00, to get the control I needed for the final highlights. Once that is set, I then go over the entirety of the bike again with a gloss varnish, ready for the oil wash. So onto the lady. This again was quite a challenge, as it's such a small scale. So, but I didn't want to use washes in the skin, as I've gone off doing that. So I start off with Bugman's Glow, and I get as much of the skin covered in that colour. Nice thin coats as always, as done nice as fast as possible, because although it's only a small model, if you're using the thin layers you should be okay. So next is Bugman's and Cadian. I'm using a GW standard here, and I do apologise, getting the camera angle from there is quite tricky at times, especially on such a small scale. And I'm just adding that as gentle highlights across all of the skin, starting to pick out the detail work, but and these highlights are quite broad, so I'm doing more of a general section highlight over the top. I then add some more Cadian into the mix, and I start to replicate the same thing but on a smaller scale. Starting to use the highlight band system, focusing around the muscle textures between the boobs, leaving these sort of areas slightly darker, where the natural shadows would start to appear. After that, again some more Cadian, so I'm building these layers up really subtly, throwing focus into the crease between the shoulder blades, and obviously allowing these regions to have extra depth where it will be relevant. I'm focusing the highlights towards the upper sections of the muscle textures, bringing that to a lovely sort of blended effect. So adding even more Cadian flesh tone to the mix. It's pretty much just pure Cadian at this point. Starting to pick out the highest sections of the muscle textures, really pulling that paint together, making those highlights start to be really stark, but only on small areas to really blend them up. So now I'm starting to use a smaller brush, and I'm adding Kiss Left Flesh to the mix, and just allowing really thin glaze to focus on the upper sections of the shoulder blades, the tops of the arms, bringing that muscle texture really vibrantly. And now for the uppermost highlights, it is a mix of Kiss Left Flesh and Moonray Flesh from Scale 75, and I'm using these as on the final points of a highlight. And this using a wet palette allows you to get the paint really thin, and you can just build up those highlights ever so slowly, and you can just pick out those top sections of the muscle texture as best you can. Again, as you can see, I'm using a Winsor Newton here, picking those highlights, working around the elbows, etc., where the light would hit the most. And the next colour onto the shirt is Filthy Brown. Now at this point I hadn't realised that she was wearing a belly top, so I started painting her shirt yellow, and then went over what I thought was her waist wearing a shirt. As it turned out, it was actually a torso, so I did have to go back and paint the torso in the same method, which, as you can imagine, was quite frustrating. After a couple of layers of Filthy Brown had gone down, it is now golden yellow. I wanted a really vibrant colour for the yellow for the top, as I was working something similar to the box art. Now the box art is painted by Studio Giraldo's, which is the guy who's amazing, and I was just using the box art for inspiration. The next is a golden yellow with some pale yellow in there, just to start working the highlights again together. Now I'm starting to notice that my brush is fraying at the edges, so GW brushes, they do a good job, but they don't last long, unfortunately. So I'm probably going to be in the market for another standard sort of size brush now. Next is pale yellow. Again, this is extremely thin, and I'm focusing towards most upper regions of the body, so across the tops of the boobs, and like around the torso where the light would hit nicely. And it's just a case of building up those colour layers really steadily and making things look, using the colours to make it look as smooth as possible. Next is pure pale yellow now, just to throw the final highlights in, just to make it look that extra bit more vibrant. Now I'm using really thin golden yellow now, just to add a little bit of depth into the darker sections, and just to tidy up anywhere where I'd messed up a little bit with the highlights, and just blend it all back together again. So for the hair, I start off with Vallejo's Brown Glaze. So this takes a couple of layers, as it is a glaze paint, but it is a very nice chocolatey brown colour, so it really does complement the rest of the colour scheme on the lass really nicely. And I also use the same colours for the handle of the sword. Onto the goggles, that is based in Scale 75's navy blue, and then I start highlighting it up with the crag blue for the first earlier layers. So here we are with the crag blue. I'm doing this the same way as you would paint gemstones, using the lower corners where the light would be reflected, and obviously I'm using a small brush here just to get the control you need, because you don't, as I spent all that time painting a face, I don't want to ruin it by painting a nose bright blue. So next is Fenris Grey. Again, working towards those tiniest corners on the lower edges of the glasses. Now, as you can see, I'm using very thin paint, as I want to be able to control it and not have too stark highlights into the sunglasses. The next one is Pale Grey Blue for the final touches, where the light would flare from the sunglasses, and just then start to blend it up together with thinner paint of the base layer just to tie it all together. So onto the hair again. It's very, very thin chocolate brown by Vallejo. As always, we use a variety of paints here, so you can use any single paint system you choose. It's just that we like to use a variety of whatever's knocking about. And as you can see, I'm using a small brush and going along with the strands of the hair, just to attenuate the wave of the natural wave of the hair. I then use Earth, again another Vallejo colour, just really thin and focusing towards the upper section, around the parting, etc. Just to make the hair come to life. Throw some more colour pattern changes onto it. I'm just focusing around the single strands now. Working with the brush to bring the hair to sort of a natural sort of highlighted colour. I then put an Agrax Earthshade wash onto it just to bring the colour all together. So what I did notice was that you can actually see a bra on the back. So I painted that in navy blue by scale 75. Again, I'm having to use a very, very thin brush here because the details are so thin. It's very hard to work with. And I've just added a touch of Fenris blue just to the highlights on it. Onto the sword, it is McCrag blue, and I'm essentially wet blending the blade with Fenris grey onto the blade, so I have that sort of power blade effect, what you see on some of the Space Marines, etc. I'm doing this by hand, which is another first for me. I've never done this by hand. I normally use an airbrush, but I wanted to push myself a little bit and show you something a little bit more interesting than just me straight airbrushing something what I could easily do. So now I'm throwing some Fenris grey onto the blade in an alternating section, so the inside and then the outside on one side of it, and then the opposite on the other side of the blade. So you get that two-tone sort of look. So even though I've not finished the painting there, I'm still throwing the highlights in where I want the light reflection to be. So you can constantly getting that extra highlight into the blade, and then you mixing the darker paint together whilst everything's still wet, allowing you to blend the colours together lovely. And it is important to use have the paint really thin. I did have to go back over this a few times as the paint looked a little bit thick, so I had to come back and do it even more times than I would have wanted if I'd have thinned my paint enough first time round. I'm just feathering the paint together where the highlights meet the shadows, so you get a really cool effect after a few minutes of just bringing them paints in and out, dark and light. After that, mask goal. I wanted her trousers to be red, but I knew it was going to be an arduous task to paint it by hand, so I got the airbrush out. So I started off with Mephiston red as the base tone for all of the red work. Obviously, doing it with the airbrush makes life a bit easier, but also it allows me to control the blends easier as well. The next layer is Evil Sun's red, and I'm coming at this from probably about 45 degrees again. It's a lovely bright colour, and just really sort of wanted to add that to the green of the bike, so it's makes the model look that bit more striking. as you can see, I'm building the colours up really gently towards the forward sections of the legs as well. And finally, Wild Rider Red of the extreme upper sections of the model, including the hands as well. I wanted the gloves to be in the same red leather as on the legs. Just wanted to tie it all together. After that, I start to add a touch of leather to the... oh no, I'm removing the mask hole, which, as you can see, protected all the paintwork, although it did pull the arms off, which I found quite frustrating. I've been to glue the arms back on once I'd pulled all the mask hole off. So now it's onto the leather work. So her belt and the armour, her leg armour, is based in heavy brown, the layered colour. Now, probably XV88 would be a similar sort of tone over this red. I wanted the armour to look completely separate from the rest of the model, so she's put clothes on and then bolted the armour on top. After that, it is heavy khaki. Again, using that as a early highlight. Now these are quite striking colours, working together on this particular thing. I was a little bit surprised by how bright the highlights came out on this. So instead of using Agrax, I used a strong tone for the shading. Next layer is khaki. Once the khaki had gone down though, that's when I put the strong tone on. I'm using khaki to really pick out those final highlights, allowing the model to really start to pop where the armour sections are. And now I'm using strong tone, a couple of thin layers of it onto the armour, just to tie those highlights together and add some depth to the sections as well. So there you are. After the oil wash, throw a few different effects onto the bike itself off camera. You've seen me do that sort of thing before, so I didn't feel the need to show the same things again. What did I learn? Well, non-metallic metal's really difficult, but it was a lot of fun to paint. I could possibly go back and do some extra pin highlights on the legs maybe, just to bring it all up that extra layer. So first things first, thank you to the Outpost for being our affiliate. If you want extra cheap models, check out our affiliate link below us. And obviously we need to thank our Patreons, which is Joe Spearpoint, Rob Pates Models, Warren Brunsden, Ludwig Hofbauer and the Oak Boys. You guys are awesome. We couldn't do this without you, so thank you very much. And obviously if you want to see more of the stuff we do, or just want to hang out and watch us be idiots, check out our Facebook page, check us out on Patreon. Obviously like and subscribe to our videos on YouTube as well. And with that, thank you for watching guys, and I shall catch you in the next one. Take care, have a good day.